Ruth Calloway ripped the frozen blanket off her own shoulders and wrapped it around her 4-year-old daughter's blue lips. Emmy had stopped shivering. That was worse. Beside them, 7-year-old Nora pressed her face into Ruth's ribs and whispered, "Mama, the driver isn't breathing anymore." Outside, Wyoming tried to kill them with every gust. Ruth had fled Missouri with 2 daughters, a stolen jar of coins, and a lie she'd written to a stranger named Jesse Hawkins. She'd promised him she was alone. She wasn't. And now they were dying on his doorstep. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Ruth and Jesse's story reaches. Hit that subscribe button and settle in, because this story will break your heart and build it back stronger. "Mama, the driver isn't breathing anymore." Nora's voice cut through the wind like a blade. Ruth Calloway shoved the coach door open with her shoulder and climbed out into white nothing. Snow hit her face so hard she couldn't see. She grabbed the side of the coach, pulled herself up to the driver's seat. Bill Mercer sat frozen in place, eyes open, hands still wrapped around reins that led to horses standing dead still in drifts up to their chests. "Bill!" Ruth shook him. "Bill, wake up!" His head tilted. Snow fell off his hat brim. He didn't blink. Ruth pressed 2 fingers to his neck the way her grandmother taught her. She held them there for 10 seconds. 20. Nothing. She climbed back down. Her hands were shaking so bad she missed the step and fell into snow up to her waist. She fought her way to the coach door, yanked it open. Nora stared at her. 7 years old with eyes that belonged to a woman 3 times her age. "Is he dead, Mama?" Yes. Ruth didn't lie to Nora. She'd made that promise the night they ran from Silas, and she'd kept it through 6 months of barns and church floors and strangers' charity. Nora deserved truth, even ugly truth. "Are we going to die too?" No. Ruth pulled herself inside, slammed the door against the wind. Emmy lay on the seat, wrapped in every piece of cloth Ruth owned. Her lips were blue. Her body had stopped shivering an hour ago, and Ruth knew what that meant. She'd watched her grandmother treat frostbite on miners in Missouri winters. When the shivering stops, the body is surrendering. "Emmy, baby." Ruth lifted her daughter against her chest, opened her coat, pressed the small body against her own skin. The cold of Emmy's flesh made her gasp. "Stay with me, you hear, Mama? Stay right here." Emmy didn't answer. Emmy hadn't spoken above a whisper in 3 months. Not since Silas. "Mama, what do we do?" Nora's voice was steady, too steady for 7. Ruth looked through the frosted window. Nothing but white in every direction. The road was gone. The world was gone. Somewhere ahead, maybe a mile, maybe 5, a man named Jesse Hawkins had a ranch with a fireplace and warm food. A man she'd never met. A man she'd lied to. "We walk," Ruth said. "In this?" "Emmy dies if we stay here, Nora. She needs fire and she needs it now. I saw fence posts a ways back. Fence posts lead to a ranch. We follow them." Nora looked at her sister, at the blue lips and closed eyes. Then she pulled on her thin coat and buttoned it to her throat. "I'll carry the bag." Ruth almost broke right there. Almost fell apart, watching her 7-year-old daughter pick up the carpet bag that held everything they owned and stand ready to walk into a blizzard. "Stay behind me," Ruth said. "Hold on to my coat. Don't let go for any reason. If you can't see me, you pull hard. Understand?" "Yes, Mama." Ruth wrapped Emmy inside her coat, buttoned it over the child's body so only Emmy's face pressed against her collarbone. She could feel the shallow breathing, faint and wrong. Then she opened the coach door and stepped out into the storm. The cold was alive. It clawed at her face, her hands pushed against her chest like a man trying to shove her backward. Ruth bent into it and walked. Behind her, she felt Nora's small fist gripping the back of her coat. She found the fence posts by walking into one. Her knee hit the wood, and she went down on all fours, Emmy jolting against her chest. Ruth bit her tongue to keep from crying out. Tasted blood. Got up. "Mama?" Nora's voice, muffled by wind. "I'm fine. Found the fence. We follow it. Don't let go." Post by post. That's how they moved. Ruth kept her left hand on the wire, feeling for each post, counting them. 1, 2, 3. Each one meant they were closer. Each one meant Emmy had a chance. The wind shifted. Ruth smelled wood smoke. She stopped, lifted her face into the storm and breathed in. Wood smoke. Someone had a fire burning. Someone was close. "Nora, do you smell that?" "Smoke, Mama." "Run toward it. Stay on the fence line, but move fast." Ruth's legs burned. Emmy's weight pulled at her shoulders. Her fingers on the wire had gone numb 10 posts back, and she was navigating by feel alone, stumbling forward through drifts that grabbed at her skirts like hands. Then she saw light, a yellow square in the white. A window. "Hello!" Ruth screamed into the wind. "Help us! Please, someone help!" The yellow square didn't change. Nobody came. The wind ate her voice before it traveled 10 feet. She reached the fence gate, pushed through it, crossed what she guessed was a yard, tripping over something buried in snow. Reached the porch, climbed steps she couldn't see, found a door. Ruth hammered on it with her frozen fist, once, twice, 3 times. The door swung open, and a man stood there in long johns and a half-buttoned shirt, a rifle in one hand. Dark hair wild from sleep, face hard as the land around him. Gray eyes that locked onto hers with the sharp focus of someone used to trouble, arriving without warning. "Who the hell are you?" "Ruth Calloway. You sent for me." She was gasping, barely standing. "Your stagecoach driver is dead a mile back. My daughter is dying of cold right now in my arms, and I need your fire. Let me in." Jesse Hawkins stared at the woman on his porch. Snow caked her hair, her coat, her eyelashes. She was shaking so hard, her teeth cracked together between words. And buttoned inside her coat, pressed against her body, a small face with blue lips and closed eyes. He stepped back. "Get inside. Now!" Ruth pushed past him and went straight for the fireplace. Embers glowed low. She dropped to her knees, unbuttoned her coat with fingers that wouldn't cooperate, and pulled Emmy free. "I need that fire built up," she said without looking back. "Blankets. Warm water, not hot, warm. And something to drink. Broth if you have it." Jesse set the rifle down. He moved fast for a big man. Logs on the fire, blankets from the chest by the wall. He pumped water, set it on the stove, grabbed a jar of beef stock from the pantry. All of it done in the time it took Ruth to peel Emmy's frozen clothes off and wrap her in the first blanket. "Mama?" Nora appeared in the doorway, snow falling off her in chunks. The carpet bag hung from her hand, dragging on the floor. She looked at the strange house, the strange man, the rifle leaning against the wall. "Come here, baby." Ruth held out one arm. Nora crossed the room and pressed against her mother's side, eyes never leaving Jesse. Jesse crouched by the fire, feeding it, not looking at them, giving them space. But Ruth saw his shoulders tighten when Nora came in, saw him do the math. He turned his head. "Your letter said you were alone." "I know what my letter said. That's a 7-year-old girl standing there." And that's a baby in your arms. Your letter said alone, Miss Calloway. No children. No family. Mrs. Calloway. I'm a widow. And her name is Emmy. She's 4. The one giving you that look is Nora. She's 7. Ruth met his gaze over Emmy's head. I lied. I had to. No man answers a letter from a woman dragging 2 children through winter. You'd have picked someone easier. Jesse's jaw tightened. He stood up, and Nora flinched. One small step backward, her hand finding Ruth's sleeve and gripping hard. Jesse saw it. The flinch. The grab. The way the girl positioned herself between him and the baby, like she'd done it 100 times before. Something changed in his face. The anger didn't disappear, but it moved aside to make room for something else. Who taught her to be scared of men? His voice was low. Life taught her that. I asked who. Ruth hesitated. My husband's brother. After Henry died, Silas inherited the house. He wanted us gone. He wasn't gentle about making that clear. He hit them? He hit me. He scared them. There's more than one way to hurt children. Jesse looked at Nora. The girl stared back at him, chin up, trembling but not backing down. He'd seen that look on cornered animals, on horses that had been beaten. Brave and terrified at the same time. I ain't him, Jesse said to Nora directly. Not to Ruth, to the child. I ain't whoever hurt your mama. This is my ranch, and nobody gets hurt here. You understand? Nora didn't answer. She didn't nod. She just watched him with those old eyes, cataloging everything, filing it away. Jesse turned back to Ruth. The driver's dead? Frozen on his seat. Coach is a mile east on the road, if there's still a road. There won't be till spring at this rate. Jesse rubbed his face with both hands. He looked tired in a way that went past sleep. You picked a hell of a time to show up, Mrs. Calloway. I didn't pick the blizzard. No, but you picked the lie. And now I got a dead driver to deal with, 3 mouths I wasn't expecting to feed, and a winter that's fixing to bury us all. He paused. I sent for a woman to cook and clean. I got a widow with 2 children, and a dangerous man somewhere behind her. Ruth flinched. Silas doesn't know where we are. You sure about that? She wasn't. That truth hung between them. Emmy stirred. A small sound escaped her throat, and Ruth looked down. Color was returning to her daughter's cheeks. The warmth was working. Ruth pressed her hand to Emmy's forehead. She's warming up. Her pulse is stronger. Jesse watched Ruth check the child's fingers and toes, watched her rub warmth into small hands with practiced skill. You know doctoring. My grandmother was a healer in Missouri. Herbs, poultices, fevers. She taught me before she died. We don't have a doctor within 30 miles. Last one left before the snow came. Jesse said this like a fact, not a complaint. If you can doctor, that changes things. I can doctor, I can cook. I can keep books, sew, make soap, preserve food for winter, teach children to read and do sums. I can do anything you need done, Jesse Hawkins, and I'll work harder than any woman you could have found, because I have more to lose. She held Emmy tighter. These are my daughters. They are not negotiable. You take me, you take them. And in return, I'll make your ranch run better than it has since your wife died. That's not a boast. That's a fact. The room went silent except for the fire. Jesse stood there looking at this half-frozen woman kneeling on his floor, giving him terms like she had any leverage at all. She had nothing. No money, no options, no way out until spring. She was completely at his mercy, and she knew it, and she was still setting conditions. What was her name? Ruth asked. Jesse blinked. What? Your wife. What was her name? Margaret. How long? 14 months. How'd she die? Jesse's whole body went rigid. That ain't your business. It is if I'm sleeping in her house, raising children where she raised none. I need to know what I'm walking into. Nobody had spoken to Jesse Hawkins like that in 14 months, maybe longer. People in town tiptoed around his grief like it might bite them. This woman, still shaking from cold, daughter barely alive in her arms, asked the question straight. Childbirth, he said. Baby didn't make it either. Ruth closed her eyes. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be what you say you are. Cook, clean, keep the house. Earn your place. He grabbed his coat from the hook by the door. Room at the end of the hall. Bed's made. There's a lock. He pulled on boots, opened the door. Cold rushed in. Where are you going? Ruth asked. Barn. Horses need tending. And I need to think about what the hell just happened to my life. Jesse. He stopped, but didn't turn around. Thank you for opening the door. Don't thank me yet. We got a long winter ahead. And Mrs. Calloway, you and I are going to have a real conversation about that lie. Soon. He walked into the storm and pulled the door shut behind him. Ruth let out a breath she'd been holding since Missouri. Her arms ached. Her legs throbbed. Her fingers were cracked and bleeding from the fence wire. But Emmy was warm. Emmy was breathing. And they had a roof. Nora sat on the floor beside her, arms wrapped around her knees, watching the closed door. He's mad, Mama. He has a right to be. But he gave us a room, with a lock. Yes, he did. Uncle Silas took our lock off. Ruth pulled Nora against her side, held both daughters close. This isn't Uncle Silas's house. Nora was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. Emmy's breathing steadied into something close to sleep. Mama? Yes, baby. He called me scared. I ain't scared. Ruth kissed the top of her daughter's head. I know you're not. You're the bravest person I ever met, Nora Calloway. Braver than you? Much braver than me. Nora pressed closer. I'll watch him. Every day. And if he's bad, I'll know first. I always know first. I know you do. And Mama? I'm hungry. Ruth almost laughed. Almost. Let's see what this cowboy has in his kitchen. She laid Emmy down near the fire, wrapped tight in blankets, and stood on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The kitchen was a disaster. Dirty dishes piled in a basin, flour spilled on the counter and never cleaned, a pot of something on the stove that might have been soup 3 days ago, dried mud everywhere, a mending pile in the corner so high it had tipped over and spilled across the floor. 14 months of a man living alone in grief. Every surface told the story. Margaret's absence screamed from the dust on the mantel, the curtains hanging crooked, the garden Ruth could see through the window, dead and buried under snow. Ruth found bread, hard but not moldy. She found butter in a cold box by the back door. She found a jar of preserved peaches, still sealed, probably Margaret's work from the summer before she died. She sliced the bread, spread butter, opened the peaches, set a plate on the floor beside Nora. Eat slow. Your stomach's been empty too long. Nora grabbed the bread and bit into it like she was afraid someone would take it away. Ruth watched her eat and felt the familiar burn behind her eyes. 6 months of feeding her children before feeding herself. 6 months of watching them grow thinner while she smiled and said everything was fine. She made herself eat too. 1 slice of bread, 3 peach halves. She needed strength for whatever came next. Through the kitchen window, Ruth could see the barn. A lantern flickered inside. Jesse was in there, doing whatever men did when they needed to think. Talking to horses, probably. Henry used to talk to the mules at the mine when he was working through a problem. Said they were better listeners than people. Ruth washed the plate, dried it, put it back exactly where she found it. Then she checked on Emmy again. The girl's color was pink now, her breathing deep and even. Sleeping real sleep instead of the shallow nothing that had terrified Ruth in the coach. She carried Emmy down the hall and found the room Jesse mentioned. Small, clean enough. A single bed with a quilt that had been washed recently. A dresser with a mirror. And a lock on the inside of the door. Brass, solid, recently oiled. He'd oiled the lock. He'd known she was coming, and he'd made sure the lock worked. Ruth laid Emmy on the bed, tucked the quilt around her. Nora climbed up beside her sister without being told. The two girls curled together the way they'd slept for 6 months. Nora's arm went around Emmy automatically. "Mama, are we staying here?" "For now, baby. The snow won't let us go anywhere else." "Is the cowboy man going to let us stay after the snow melts?" Ruth sat on the edge of the bed and brushed hair from Nora's face. "I'm going to make sure he does. I'm going to make myself so useful to this ranch that he can't imagine it without us. That's what we do, Nora. We make ourselves necessary." "Like at the Hendersons' farm? And the church in Kansas City?" "Better than that. This time we're not passing through. This time we're planting roots." Nora thought about this. "Roots are good. Plants with roots don't blow away." "Exactly right." Ruth locked the door, tested it twice. Then she sat in the only chair, facing the window, where snow still fell in curtains of white, and let herself shake. Not from cold this time, from everything. The fear she'd held at bay for 6 months, finally finding cracks in her armor. She'd made it. They'd made it. Barely, impossibly, by the width of a prayer, but they were here. In a house with a fire and a lock and a man who might be angry, but who'd carried a strange child to warmth without being asked. Emmy was alive. Nora was fed. And somewhere outside, Jesse Hawkins was in his barn, rethinking every decision that had led to this moment. Ruth closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd cook the best breakfast this man had eaten in 14 months. She'd clean his kitchen until it shone. She'd mend that pile of clothes and scrub those floors and prove that she was worth the trouble. Tomorrow she'd start earning their place. Tonight she just breathed, in and out, in and out, alive. From the bed, Emmy shifted in her sleep. One small hand reached out, found nothing, and pulled back. Then her lips moved, barely a sound. The first word she'd spoken to anyone but Nora in 3 months. "Warm." Ruth pressed her hand to her mouth and cried without making a sound. One word. One tiny word from a child who'd been scared silent. It wasn't much. It was everything. Outside, the blizzard raged. Inside, a fire burned. And in a small room at the end of a hallway, 3 lives hung in the balance between a lie and a locked door. Between a woman's desperation and a man's grief. Between the winter that trapped them and the spring that might set them free. Ruth Calloway had built her whole life on less than this. She'd build it again. Ruth woke before dawn with Emmy's hand fisted in her dress and Nora's knee jammed against her spine. She lay still for a moment, listening. Wind outside, quieter than last night, but still pushing against the walls. The fire in the main room had burned down. She could tell by the cold creeping under the door. She eased herself free from the girls without waking them, unlocked the door as quietly as she could, and stepped into the hallway. The house was dark and frigid. She moved by feel to the main room, found the fireplace, the matches on the mantel, the kindling box. Within minutes, she had flames climbing again. The kitchen was worse in daylight than it had been by lantern. Grease caked on the stove, a skillet with something burned black still sitting in it. She found coffee in a tin, smelled it, decided it would do. She pumped water, filled the pot, set it to boil. Then she rolled up her sleeves and started on the dishes. She was elbow deep in cold water when she heard boots on the porch. The door opened, and Jesse came in, carrying an armload of firewood. He stopped when he saw her. "You're up." "I've been up." He stacked the wood by the fireplace, straightened, looked at the kitchen, at the clean dishes drying on the counter, at the coffee starting to steam, at Ruth, standing there in yesterday's dress, with her sleeves rolled past her elbows, and her hair pulled back with a strip of cloth torn from her petticoat. "You didn't have to start yet," he said. "You nearly died last night." "Nearly doesn't count. And your kitchen nearly died a long time ago." Something twitched at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. Not yet. Margaret kept it better. "I imagine she did." Ruth dried her hands. "Sit down. I'll have eggs and coffee in 10 minutes, if you've got eggs." "Chickens are in the coop behind the barn. Tom collects in the mornings." "Tom?" "Tom Greenfield, ranch hand. He lives in the bunkhouse. 19 years old, works hard, doesn't talk much." Jesse pulled out a chair but didn't sit. "He's out checking on the driver's body. We'll need to bury Bill Mercer when the ground thaws enough to dig." Ruth nodded. She'd pushed the dead man from her mind to survive the night, but the weight of it came back now. A man had died getting her here. That meant something. That cost something. The back door banged open, and the young man came in, stomping snow off his boots, carrying a basket of eggs. He was tall and thin, with a boy's face and a man's hands, red from cold. He saw Ruth and stopped dead. "Tom, this is Mrs. Calloway. She arrived last night." Jesse's voice gave nothing away. "She'll be staying." Tom looked at Jesse, then at Ruth, then back at Jesse. "Yes, sir. Ma'am." He set the eggs on the counter and retreated out the back door so fast he forgot to close it. "He's shy," Jesse said. "He's confused. You told him you were expecting one woman, and she showed up with 2 children in a blizzard." "I haven't told him about the children yet." "Then you better, before he walks in on 2 little girls and drops those eggs." Jesse finally sat. Ruth cracked 6 eggs into the cleaned skillet, found salt, found a spatula. The stove was temperamental, but she figured its rhythm fast. Everything got done faster when she was angry, and she was angry now. Not at Jesse, at herself for the lie. At Silas for making the lie necessary. At the whole damn world for putting her in a position where honesty was a luxury she couldn't afford. She set a plate in front of Jesse. Eggs, toast from the last of the bread she'd found last night. Coffee, black and strong. He looked at it like he'd forgotten what a real breakfast looked like. "This is..." He picked up the fork. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Eat." Ruth poured herself coffee and leaned against the counter. She wasn't going to sit with him. Not yet. She hadn't earned that. Jesse ate in silence. When he finished, he pushed the plate back and wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "All right, Mrs. Calloway. Your daughter's alive. You're warm and fed. Now we talk." Ruth set her cup down. "Ask what you need to ask." "Why'd you lie?" "Because I was desperate, and I thought the truth would cost me the only chance my girls had." "You were right. It would have." Jesse's voice was flat. "I wrote that advertisement looking for one woman. Someone to cook and clean and maybe, eventually, if things worked out, become a wife. I wasn't looking for a family. I wasn't looking for children." "I know. I lost a child, Mrs. Calloway. A baby that never drew breath. I buried her next to Margaret in the south field. 14 months ago, I stood over that grave and swore I'd never go through that again." His hands tightened on the cup. "And now you've brought 2 little girls into this house without asking me, without giving me a choice." Ruth felt the words land like stones. He was right. She knew he was right. That made it worse. "You had a choice," she said quietly. "You could have left us on the porch." "In a blizzard? With a child going blue?" Jesse's voice cracked with something between anger and disbelief. "What kind of man do you think I am?" "I think you're the kind of man who opens his door in a storm and gives a stranger a room with a lock. That's why I picked you, Jesse. Out of every advertisement I saw, yours was the only one that said, 'must be of good character,' instead of 'must be young and pretty.' You were looking for a person, not a purchase." Jesse stared at her. The fire popped behind them. "That doesn't make the lie all right." "No, it doesn't, and I won't make excuses for it." Ruth crossed her arms, holding herself together. "But I need you to understand something. Nora and Emmy are not negotiable. If you want me gone when the snow melts, I'll go. But they go where I go. Always. I'm not sending anyone out in winter. I'm not that cruel, and I'm not that stupid." "Then we have time. Let me prove what I'm worth to this ranch. Give me the winter. If by spring you still want us gone, I'll leave without argument. But give me a chance to show you that 3 mouths aren't a burden when 2 hands are working hard enough." Jesse pushed back from the table. He stood, walked to the window, stood with his back to her. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he gripped the windowsill. "Emmy," he said. "The little one. What happened to her? Why doesn't she talk?" "She talks. Just whispers. Just to Nora." "Why?" Ruth's throat closed. She made herself speak anyway. "After Henry died, Silas moved into the house. It was legally his. He wanted us out, but he wanted it to look like we left by choice so the neighbors wouldn't judge him. He'd come into our room at night, stand over the bed, tell me if I didn't leave by morning, he'd take the girls." Jesse turned from the window. "He never touched them," Ruth said quickly. "I made sure of that." But Emmy heard him, night after night. A big man standing in the dark, yelling at her mother. One morning, she just stopped talking. Nora says she still speaks when they're alone. She said, "warm," last night. That's the first word I've heard from her in 3 months. Jesse's face had gone very still. The kind of still that meant something was happening beneath the surface. Something big and dangerous being held in check. "Where is this Silas now?" "Missouri, last I know. He doesn't know where we went. I left in the middle of the night and didn't tell a soul." "Does he have legal claim to those girls?" The question Ruth dreaded most. "He's their closest male relative. If he wanted to, he could petition for custody. Say I'm unfit, an abandoned woman with no means of support." "But you're not abandoned. You're employed." Ruth looked at him. "Am I?" Jesse held her gaze for a long moment. "Through winter. We'll see about the rest." It wasn't acceptance. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was ground to stand on, and Ruth had learned to build on less. A small sound from the hallway. Ruth turned. Nora stood there in her nightdress, bare feet on cold wood, holding Emmy's hand. The younger girl hid behind her sister, peeking at Jesse with one eye. "Mama, Emmy's hungry." Ruth moved toward them, but Jesse spoke first. He crouched down slowly, the way you'd approach a wild animal, and spoke directly to Nora. "There's eggs and toast on the stove. Your mama made it. You want to come eat?" Nora looked at him with that measuring gaze Ruth knew so well. The girl was cataloging everything. The distance between Jesse and the door, the rifle still leaning against the wall, the way his hands hung open at his sides, not clenched, not reaching. "We can get it ourselves," Nora said. "We don't need your help." "Nora," Ruth started. "I know you don't need it," Jesse said. "I'm offering it anyway. That's what people do in a house. They offer." Nora considered this. Then she walked to the kitchen table, pulling Emmy behind her, and climbed into a chair. Emmy climbed into the one next to her, so small her chin barely cleared the table. She wouldn't look at Jesse. She looked at Ruth. Ruth fixed 2 plates, smaller portions, softer food for Emmy, whose stomach hadn't had proper meals in days. She set them down and sat beside her daughters. Jesse stayed standing by the fireplace, keeping distance. Nora ate fast, protective, one arm curled around her plate, the way she'd learned in the months of not knowing where the next meal was coming from. Emmy ate slowly, chewing each bite like she had to remember how. "Good eggs," Nora said, grudgingly. "Mama's are better than what we had at the church." Nora. "What? They are." Jesse picked up his hat from the hook. "I'll be in the barn most of the day. Storm's dying down, but the cattle need checking. Tom and I will be back by dark." He paused at the door, looking at Ruth. "There's flour and salt in the pantry, dried beef in the cellar. Garden's dead under the snow, but there's preserves on the shelf in the back room. Margaret put them up last summer." He said his dead wife's name the same way he said everything else. Flat and careful, like a man walking across thin ice. "If you need anything you can't find, ask Tom when he comes back through." "I'll manage." "I know you will." He put on his hat. "I've seen you're kind of stubborn before. Is that a compliment or a complaint?" "Haven't decided yet." He left. The door closed. Cold air swirled and settled. Nora looked at Ruth. "He's still mad about the lie." "Yes." "Are you going to say sorry again?" "No. I'm going to show him sorry. Words are cheap, Nora. Actions are what count." Ruth stood, gathering plates. "Finish eating. Then we work." They worked. Ruth attacked that house like it owed her money. She scrubbed the kitchen floor on hands and knees, while Nora wiped down shelves. She cleaned the stove until the iron gleamed. She went through the pantry, took stock of every jar, every tin, every sack of flour and sugar. She found Margaret's preserves on the back shelf, lined up with careful labels in a neat hand. Strawberry, peach, green tomato, plum. Each jar a small monument to a woman who'd planned for a future she didn't get to see. Ruth touched the jars gently and left them exactly where they were. By midday, she'd tackled the mending pile. Most of it was simple work. Buttons missing, seams split, socks worn through at the heel. She sat by the fire with the basket while Nora read aloud from a book she'd found on a shelf, a collection of animal stories with pictures. Emmy sat on the floor near the warmth, drawing on a scrap of brown paper with a piece of charcoal Nora had found by the stove. Ruth watched Emmy draw, small, careful strokes. A shape that might have been a house. Another shape beside it, taller, with something that could have been smoke coming from the top. A chimney. Emmy was drawing this house, this chimney, this fire. Ruth's hands stilled on the mending. She watched her daughter create something from nothing on a piece of scrap paper, and she felt hope crack through her chest like a green shoot through frozen ground. "That's beautiful, Emmy," she said softly. Emmy didn't look up, but her hand moved faster, adding something new, a small figure beside the house. Then another small figure. Then a bigger one. 3 people standing next to a house with smoke coming from the chimney. Nora leaned over to look. "That's us, Emmy, right? That's me and you and Mama." Emmy nodded without speaking. Then she added one more figure, standing apart from the others. Bigger. Alone. "Who's that?" Nora asked. Emmy whispered something Ruth couldn't hear. Nora listened, then looked at her mother with an expression Ruth couldn't read. She says it's the cowboy man. She says he looks cold standing out there by himself. Ruth looked at the drawing. 4 figures. 3 together, 1 alone. A 4-year-old's understanding of what she'd seen this morning. A man on one side of his own house. Everyone else on the other. Maybe tomorrow, Ruth said carefully, you could draw him a little closer. Emmy looked up at her mother for the first time that day. Those huge brown eyes, Henry's eyes, full of everything she couldn't say. Then she looked back at the paper and drew a line between the lone figure and the others, not moving him closer, but connecting them. It was enough. It was more than enough. Jesse and Tom came back at dusk, stamping snow, smelling of horse and cold. Jesse stopped 3 steps inside the door. The floor was clean. The dishes were put away. The stove held a pot of stew that filled the house with warmth. The mending basket was empty, clothes folded and stacked on the chair. He stood there looking at his kitchen like he'd walked into the wrong house. Tom whistled low. Well, I'll be. Sit down, Ruth said from the stove. Both of you. Dinner's ready. Tom sat immediately, the way a young man does when a woman tells him food is ready. Jesse moved slower. He took off his hat, hung his coat, pulled out a chair. His eyes found the mending pile, or rather, the absence of it. Found the clean floor. Found his coffee cup, washed and waiting on the shelf where Margaret used to keep it. You didn't have to do all this, he said quietly. Yes, I did. Ruth ladled stew into bowls. Beef, potatoes, carrots from the preserves, dried herbs she'd found in a forgotten jar. Eat before it gets cold. Nora sat at the table with her arms crossed, watching Jesse eat the way a hawk watches a field mouse. Emmy was in the corner near the fire, drawing on another piece of brown paper, keeping maximum distance from the men. Jesse tasted the stew. Something shifted in his face. He took another bite, then another. Tom was already on his second bowl. This is the best thing I've eaten since... Jesse stopped, set his spoon down, picked it up again. This is good. Margaret's preserves helped. She knew what she was doing. Jesse's jaw tightened at the name, but he nodded. She did. They ate in silence. After dinner, Tom excused himself to the bunkhouse, thanking Ruth 3 times on his way out. Jesse stayed at the table while Ruth cleared dishes and heated water for washing. I found something in the back room, Ruth said, hands in the wash water. A cradle, small, handmade. Cedar, I think. Jesse went rigid. I didn't move it. I just wanted you to know I saw it. Ruth kept washing, not looking at him. You made it for the baby. Don't. You're a good carpenter. The joints are perfect. I said, don't. His voice came out ragged, torn at the edges. Ruth turned. Jesse sat at the table with his head in his hands, shoulders drawn up like he was bracing for a blow. She dried her hands slowly and sat across from him, not touching, not reaching, just present. I'm not going to pretend it's not there, Jesse. You lost your wife and your baby. That's in every corner of this house. I can't clean around it, and I won't try. What do you want me to say? Nothing. Ruth folded her hands on the table. I've got my own. We can carry them separately, or we can at least be honest that they exist. Jesse lifted his head. His eyes were red, but dry. You're a hard woman, Ruth Calloway. I'm a surviving woman. There's a difference. He stared at her across the table. This stranger who'd invaded his house with her children and her competence, and her refusal to look away from the things he'd been hiding from for 14 months. He should be furious. He was furious. But underneath that, Something else was stirring, something that felt dangerously like relief. Someone saw. Someone wasn't pretending. "The cradle stays where it is," he said finally. "Of course it does." "And the preserves on the shelf. Those were Margaret's." "I know. I won't use them without asking." "Use them." The word came out rough. She made them to be used. She'd hate knowing they were just sitting there gathering dust while people went hungry. Ruth nodded. "Then I'll use them well." Jesse stood, pushed his chair in, stopped at the hallway entrance, and turned back. "Mrs. Calloway." "Ruth, if I'm cooking your meals and mending your socks, you can use my name." "Ruth." He tested it. "That stew tonight. Margaret used to make something similar. Not the same. Yours had something different in it." "Thyme. I found dried thyme in a jar behind the flour." "It was good. Different, but good." He paused. "I'll see you in the morning." "You will." He disappeared down the hall. Ruth heard his door close. She finished the dishes, banked the fire, checked the locks. Then she went to her room, where her daughters slept curled together like puppies, Nora's arm thrown over Emmy, Emmy's hand clutching a piece of brown paper covered in charcoal drawings. Ruth eased the paper from Emmy's fingers and held it up to the moonlight coming through the window. The house with the chimney, the three figures together, the one figure apart. And between them, a line drawn by a child who couldn't speak but could still reach out. Ruth pressed the drawing to her chest and sat in the chair by the window. Outside, the snow had stopped falling for the first time in 2 days. Stars burned through gaps in the clouds, cold and sharp and impossibly far away. She thought about Jesse in his room down the hall, lying in the bed he'd shared with Margaret, staring at the same ceiling he'd stared at for 14 months of silence. She thought about the cradle in the back room, empty and perfect, built by hands that had expected to hold a child. She thought about Silas in Missouri, and whether he was looking for them, and what would happen if he found them. And she thought about Emmy's drawing, that single line between the lone figure and the group, and what it might mean that a 4-year-old who was afraid of men had drawn a connection to one. Ruth Calloway closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd cook breakfast. She'd clean the house. She'd earn another day in a place that wasn't hers yet, but could be. One day at a time, one meal at a time, one small trust at a time. That was how you built a life from nothing. She'd done it before. She'd do it again. The days folded into each other like snowdrifts, one bearing the next, until Ruth lost count. A week passed, then 2. The blizzard came and went and came again, and the world outside Jesse's ranch shrank to nothing but white silence and the sound of wind testing the walls. Ruth kept her word. She cooked every meal. She scrubbed every surface. She mended every torn shirt and darned every sock, and reorganized the pantry so Jesse could find things without opening 6 wrong jars. She learned the stove's moods, learned which burner ran hot and which barely held a flame. She made bread from scratch because the nearest town was buried under 3 feet of snow and nobody was going anywhere. Jesse kept his distance. He spoke to her at meals, brief and practical. Fence posts, feed supply. How many cattle Tom counted that morning. He spoke to Nora only when she spoke first, which was rare. He didn't speak to Emmy at all, and Emmy didn't look at him, and the careful space between them became a geography of its own. But Ruth watched. She watched Jesse leave extra firewood stacked by the door every morning before she woke. She watched him carve a small wooden horse one evening and leave it on the kitchen table without a word, where Emmy found it the next morning and carried it to her corner by the fire and held it while she drew. She watched him teach Tom to make porridge on a morning Ruth slept late because Emmy had coughed all night, so that breakfast was waiting when she stumbled out, exhausted and guilty. He never said anything about these things. Ruth never mentioned them. But she catalogued each one, the way Nora catalogued his movements, building a portrait of a man who couldn't say what he felt, but couldn't stop showing it. On the 15th morning, Nora cornered Jesse in the barn. Ruth didn't know it happened until later, when Tom told her, with a look on his face like he'd witnessed something between terrifying and holy. She'd sent Nora to collect eggs from the coop, and Nora had taken a detour. "Your horses are skinny," Nora said, standing in the barn doorway with the egg basket on her arm. Jesse looked up from the bridle he was mending. "They're winter horses. They always thin out." "Mama says animals get skinny when people don't feed them right." "Your mama's got opinions about everything." "She's usually right." Nora walked in without being invited, stopped at the first stall, and looked at the bay gelding inside. The horse lowered its head toward her, and she stepped back fast. "He won't hurt you," Jesse said. "That's Dutch, dumbest horse in Wyoming, but gentle as a lamb." "I'm not scared." "I know you're not. You're not scared of anything, far as I can tell." Nora turned to face him. "I'm scared of some things." "Like what?" "Like men who are nice at first, and then stop being nice." Jesse set the bridle down. He didn't move closer, didn't stand up, just sat on the hay bale and looked at her. "Your uncle. He brought us candy the first week. Told Mama he'd take care of us. Called me pretty girl." Nora's voice was flat, reciting facts. "Then he stopped bringing candy. Then he stopped being nice. Then he started coming to our room at night and saying things that made Mama cry." "Nora, you don't have to tell me this. I'm telling you so you know." She lifted her chin. "I know how men work. They're nice when they want something. Then they get what they want and they stop. So I'm watching you, Jesse Hawkins. I'm watching what you do when you think nobody's looking." Jesse was quiet for a long time. The horse shuffled in its stall. Wind pushed against the barn walls. "What have you seen?" he asked. "When you've been watching?" Nora considered. "You leave wood by the door so Mama doesn't have to go out in the cold. You carved Emmy a horse, but you didn't give it to her yourself because you know she's scared. You eat whatever Mama cooks, and you say it's good, even when the beans were burned last Tuesday." "The beans weren't that burned." "They were pretty burned." Jesse almost smiled. Almost. "Anything else?" "You talk to your dead wife at night. I hear you through the wall. You tell her you're sorry." The almost smile vanished. Jesse looked at his hands. "I'm not spying," Nora said quickly. "The walls are thin, and I can't sleep sometimes. I didn't mean to hear." "What do you think about that? A man talking to a dead woman?" "I think it's sad." Nora hugged the egg basket against her chest. "I talk to my daddy sometimes too, in my head. I tell him about Emmy and Mama and the places we've been. I tell him I'm trying to keep them safe like he asked me to." "He asked you to keep them safe?" The last thing he said before he went down the mine. He said, "Nora girl, you watch over your mama and your sister. You're the strong one." And then he didn't come back. Jesse pressed his knuckles against his mouth. He breathed through it. When he spoke, his voice was stripped raw. "That's a hell of a thing to put on a child." "I'm not a child. I'm the strong one." "You can be both." Jesse leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Listen to me, Nora. I ain't your uncle. I ain't going to be nice for a while and then turn mean. I'm going to be exactly this difficult and exactly this quiet for as long as you know me. What you see is what there is." That's what Uncle Silas said too. "I reckon it is. So you keep watching. You watch me all winter long if you need to. And if I ever do anything, Anything at all that makes you or your sister feel unsafe, you tell your mama, and you tell me, and we fix it. Deal?" Nora stared at him. She was 7 years old, carrying her dead father's last words like a boulder on her back, standing in a stranger's barn, deciding whether to trust again. Ruth would have wept to see it. Jessie just waited. "Deal," Nora said finally, "but I'm still watching." "I'd be disappointed if you stopped." Nora turned and walked out with the eggs. Jessie sat in the barn for a long time after, staring at the bridle in his hands and not seeing it. Tom found him there 20 minutes later and had the good sense not to ask questions. That evening, Nora sat one chair closer to Jessie at dinner. Nobody mentioned it. Everybody noticed. The third week brought a break in the weather and a visitor. Ruth heard the horse before she saw it, the crunch of hooves on packed snow coming up the road. She went to the window and watched an old woman ride up to the porch on a gray mare, bundled in so many layers she looked like a moving quilt. Jessie came from the barn. "Hattie, what the hell are you doing out in this?" "Checking on you, you stubborn fool. Heard from Tom's supply run that you've got a woman and children out here. Figured I better come see before the whole territory turns it into a scandal." The old woman dismounted with surprising ease for someone her age. "Help me in. My bones are freezing." Jessie took the horse. The old woman climbed the porch steps, pushed open the door without knocking, and found Ruth standing in the kitchen with a ladle in one hand and Emmy hiding behind her legs. "Lord have mercy." Hattie Perkins pulled off her gloves and looked Ruth up and down. "You're the one who answered his advertisement." "I am." "And these are the children he didn't know about." "Word travels fast." "Honey, out here, word is the only thing that does travel." Hattie crossed to the fire and held her hands out. "I'm Hattie Perkins. I live 6 miles west. I've been Jesse's neighbor since before his wife died, and I was a mail-order bride myself 42 years ago. So don't think I'm here to judge you." Ruth felt something in her chest unlock. "Would you like coffee?" "I'd like whiskey, but coffee will do." Hattie sat in the chair nearest the fire and spotted Emmy peeking from behind Ruth. "And who's this little mouse?" "Emmy. She's 4. She doesn't talk much." "Doesn't or won't?" Ruth hesitated. "Won't. She's been through some things." Hattie nodded like this answered a question she hadn't asked. "I was the same after my first husband died. Didn't speak for 2 months. People thought I'd gone simple. I was just trying to figure out if the world was safe enough to put words into." She looked at Emmy with eyes that held no pity, only recognition. "Take your time, little one. The words will come back when you're ready." Nora appeared from the back room, book in hand, and assessed the stranger with her usual intensity. "Who are you?" "I'm the old woman who lives down the road and knows everyone's business." "Who are you?" "Nora Calloway. I'm 7. I can read." "Good for you. Most grown men out here can't say that." Hattie looked at Ruth. "She's got fire in her." "She does. She'll need it." Hattie's voice dropped. "Listen to me carefully, Ruth. I didn't ride 6 miles in this cold just to meet you. I came to warn you. People in town are already talking. An unmarried woman living with a widower. Children nobody knew about. The gossip is building, and it'll get ugly if you don't get ahead of it." "I've dealt with gossip before." "Not like this. Out here, reputation is survival. If the respectable women in town decide you're improper, they'll shut you out. No help at calving time. No doctor when someone gets sick. No credit at the mercantile." Hattie leaned forward. "And if anyone finds out you lied to get here, they'll use it against you. Against Jessie, too." Ruth set the coffee down harder than she intended. What are you suggesting? Marry him. Make it legal before the spring thaw opens the roads and the church ladies come sniffing around. I've been here 3 weeks. He barely talks to me. He doesn't need to talk to you. He needs to protect you. And you need to protect him. A marriage certificate makes everything proper. It gives you legal standing. It makes those girls his responsibility in the eyes of the law. Hattie paused. And it makes it a hell of a lot harder for anyone to take them from you. The words hit Ruth like cold water. She hadn't thought about it in legal terms. She'd been so focused on surviving each day, on cooking and cleaning and earning her place, that she hadn't considered the larger picture. An unmarried woman with no legal protections, 2 children with no legal father, and Silas, somewhere behind them, with blood claim to Nora and Emmy. Does Jesse know about the man you're running from? Hattie asked quietly. I told him about Silas. Enough. Does he know Silas could come for those children? He asked about legal claim. I was honest. Hattie nodded. Then he's already thinking about it. Jesse Hawkins is a lot of things, but stupid ain't one of them. He knows what a marriage would do. He's just too proud and too scared to bring it up. I can't ask a man to marry me. Why not? I asked my second husband. He said yes before I finished the sentence. Hattie smiled for the first time. You modern women and your rules. Out here we do what needs doing. Modesty is a luxury, same as everything else. The door opened and Jesse came in, shaking snow from his hat. He saw Hattie, and his expression went carefully blank. You two been talking? We have, Hattie said pleasantly. About the weather. Like hell you have. Jesse hung his coat. Hattie, whatever you're stirring up, don't. I'm not stirring anything. I'm preventing a wildfire. Hattie stood, gathered her gloves. I've said my piece. Now I'll go freeze my way home. Ruth, that coffee was the best I've had in a year. Jesse, you're an idiot, but you're a decent one. She looked at Nora. Keep reading, girl. Knowledge is the only thing nobody can take from you. She left the way she'd come, like a storm passing through. The house felt bigger without her in it. Jesse stood by the door for a long time. Ruth washed Hattie's cup and waited. She told you to marry me, Jesse said. She told me to protect my daughters. Same thing, coming from Hattie. Ruth dried her hands, turned to face him. Is she wrong? Jesse pulled out a chair and sat heavily. He looked at Ruth across the table. This woman, who'd been in his house for 3 weeks and had already changed every room in it. Not just clean, changed. Made it feel like someone lived here, instead of someone dying here, slowly. If Silas comes looking, Jesse said. If he finds you here, unmarried, living in a man's house with no legal standing, he takes those girls, Ruth. Any judge in the territory would side with a blood relative over an unmarried mother in a compromised situation. I know. But if you're married, if those girls have a stepfather with a ranch and standing in the community, he's got no ground to stand on. I know that too. Then you know what I'm about to say. Ruth sat across from him. Say it anyway. Jesse's jaw worked. His hands flat on the table, fingers spread. I ain't asking because I want a wife. I ain't asking because of feelings or romance or any of that. I'm asking because those 2 girls in that room deserve to be safe. Legally, permanently safe. And the only way I can guarantee that is to make them mine in the eyes of the law. You're proposing. I'm offering protection, a name, legal standing for you and the girls. In return, you keep doing what you're doing, running this house, caring for things, being... He stopped. Being what you've been. To all of us. Ruth's eyes burned, but she didn't let the tears fall. What about Margaret? Jesse flinched. What about her? You loved her. You still love her. You talk to her ghost through the walls at night. How does a dead woman feel about you marrying a stranger? Margaret would tell me to stop being a fool and do what's right. Jesse's voice cracked once, then held. She was practical. More practical than me. She'd look at those girls and she'd say, Jesse Hawkins, you protect them. That's what men do. And that's all this would be? Protection? That's all I can promise right now. Ruth looked at him. This broken, stubborn, careful man who carved toys for a child who feared him and left firewood by the door and talked to his dead wife at night because he didn't know how to talk to the living ones standing in his kitchen. I have conditions, Ruth said. Name them. The girls call you whatever they choose. You don't push. Emmy especially. She comes to you in her own time, or not at all. Agreed. I keep my own space until I decide otherwise. A marriage on paper doesn't mean a marriage in that bedroom. Not until we're both ready. Agreed. I wouldn't expect anything else. And one more thing. Ruth leaned forward. You stop apologizing to Margaret's ghost for living your life. She's gone, Jesse. She'd want you to be here. All the way here. Not half in a grave with her. Jesse went still. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the back room, Nora was reading to Emmy, her young voice steady and clear through the thin walls. That's a hard ask. Everything worth doing is hard. You told me that about ranching. It's true about living, too. He was quiet for so long, Ruth thought he might get up and walk out. Instead, he reached across the table. His hand lay there, palm up, open, calloused and scarred and steady. Ruth looked at that hand, a hand that had built a house and a cradle and buried a wife and a child. A hand that had pulled a frozen stranger's daughter to warmth without hesitation. She put her hand in his. When the road's clear, Jesse said, there's a circuit preacher. We do it simple, just us and the girls, and Hattie as witness. That's enough. Ruth, his fingers tightened around hers. I can't promise to love you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I don't know if I've got that left in me. I'm not asking for love. I'm asking for honesty and safety and a chance to build something that matters. Can you give me that? I can try. Then I'll try too. They sat there, hands joined across a kitchen table. Two people making promises that weren't about romance, but about survival. About choosing each other, not from passion, but from the kind of desperate, clear-eyed courage that comes when you've lost everything and find one more thing worth fighting for. From the back room, Nora's voice carried through the wall, reading aloud to her sister. A story about a bear who lost his way in winter and found a den that wasn't his, but kept him warm until spring. Emmy listened in silence. But on the piece of brown paper in her lap, she was drawing again. The house, the chimney, the three figures together, and the fourth figure, no longer standing apart. Moved closer now, almost touching, almost home. The circuit preacher came through on the first clear day in March, a wiry man named Reverend Amos Crane, who rode a mule and carried a Bible so worn the cover had been replaced twice. Jesse met him at Hattie's place and brought him back to the ranch on a morning when the snow had pulled back just enough to show patches of brown earth underneath. Ruth dressed the girls in the cleanest clothes they had. Nora wore a ribbon Hattie had brought, blue against her dark hair, and stood very straight with her hands clasped in front of her. Emmy wore a dress Ruth had sewn from fabric Hattie donated, and she held her wooden horse in one hand and Nora's fingers in the other. Ruth wore Margaret's dress. She hadn't planned to. She'd been looking through the trunk Jesse kept at the foot of his bed, searching for a tablecloth for the dinner she'd planned, and found it folded beneath. Cream cotton, simple cut, a few small embroidered flowers along the hem. It fit like it had been made for her, which felt like either a sign or a cruelty. She couldn't decide which. Jesse saw her come out of the bedroom and stopped breathing. She watched it happen, the color leaving his face, his hands going still at his sides. "I can change," Ruth said. "I should have asked. I wasn't thinking." "Don't change." His voice was rough. She'd want it worn. She'd hate knowing it was sitting in a trunk. Hattie arrived with a jar of wildflower honey, and a look that said she'd cry if anyone gave her a reason. Tom stood by the fireplace in a clean shirt, uncomfortable and proud, holding a handful of winter wildflowers he'd found God knows where. The ceremony lasted 4 minutes. Reverend Crane spoke the words. Jesse said, "I do," looking at Ruth with an expression she couldn't read. Ruth said, "I do," looking at Jesse with an expression she didn't try to hide. Fear, gratitude, and something she wasn't ready to name. "You may kiss the bride," Reverend Crane said. Jesse leaned in. Ruth met him halfway. The kiss was brief and careful, a promise sealed rather than a passion declared. When they separated, Nora was watching with her arms crossed, and Emmy was drawing on a scrap of paper she'd smuggled into the ceremony. "Well," Hattie said, wiping her eyes, "that's done." Ruth Hawkins. She turned the name over in her mind. Ruth Hawkins. It fit differently than Calloway. Lighter somehow. Like setting down a bag she'd been carrying too long. They ate dinner together, all of them around the table for the first time. Tom told a story about a cow that had gotten stuck in a snowdrift, and Jesse had to dig it out with his bare hands. Hattie told a story about her own wedding 42 years ago, when her husband had been so nervous he'd said, "I don't," instead of "I do," and the preacher had to start over. Nora laughed, actually laughed, and Emmy looked up from her drawing and watched the laughter like it was something she was trying to remember how to do. After Hattie and the preacher left, after Tom retreated to the bunkhouse, after the girls were in bed, Ruth stood in the hallway between her room and Jesse's. "I meant what I said," Jesse told her from his doorway. "Nothing changes that you don't want changed." "I know." Ruth touched the doorframe of her room. "Good night, Jesse." "Good night, Ruth." 2 doors closed. The hallway sat empty between them. But the distance felt smaller than before. The weeks after the wedding settled into something Ruth almost recognized as peace. Jesse started coming in earlier from the barn. He'd sit at the table while Ruth cooked, not talking much, but present in a way he hadn't been before. He answered Nora's questions about the ranch, about horses, about how fences worked and why cattle needed salt licks. He never pushed toward Emmy, but he left things for her. A smooth stone from the creek bed, a piece of charcoal wrapped in cloth for her drawings, a second wooden horse, smaller than the first, so the first one would have company. Emmy collected these gifts in silence and kept them on the windowsill of the room she shared with Nora. She didn't thank Jesse. She didn't look at him when he was in the room. But Ruth noticed that the drawings were changing. The 4th figure was closer now, sometimes standing next to the 3. Once, Ruth found a drawing where the big figure and the 3 smaller figures were all under the same roof, and the chimney was sending up so much smoke it filled the whole top of the page. "She draws what she wishes for," Nora told Ruth one night. "She told me the smoke means the house is warm. She wants it to always be warm." "It will be," Ruth said. "I promise." But promises, Ruth knew, were fragile things in a world where men like Silas existed. The first sign of trouble came in April, when the roads finally opened and a letter arrived with the mail rider. Ruth was hanging laundry on the line, her hands red from cold water, when Jesse walked up holding an envelope. "It's addressed to you," he said. "Return address is a law office in St. Louis." Ruth's hands stopped. The shirt she was holding dripped onto the frozen ground. "Open it," she said. We don't have secrets anymore. Jessie tore the envelope, unfolded the letter, and read it standing right there in the yard with the wind pulling at his hat. She watched his face change, the careful blankness settling in, the jaw tightening. That look she'd learned meant something dangerous was being held down. Silas filed a petition, Jessie said, for custody of Nora and Emmy. The ground dropped out from under her. Ruth grabbed the clothesline to keep standing. On what grounds? Abandonment. Says you fled Missouri with his brother's children without consent of their legal guardian. Says you're living in an irregular domestic situation, unfit for child rearing. Jessie looked up from the letter. He's hired a lawyer, Ruth. A real one. They're requesting the territorial court compel you to return the children to Missouri for a hearing. No. The word came out of Ruth like a gunshot. No, he doesn't get to take them. He terrorized us. He drove us out of our own home. He scared my daughter into silence, and now he wants custody? The law doesn't always care about what's right. It cares about what's documented. Jessie folded the letter. But he filed this before we were married, before I adopted the girls legally. Hattie was right. The marriage changes everything. Does it change enough? I don't know. We need a lawyer. We can't afford a lawyer. We'll afford what we need to afford. Jessie's voice went hard in a way Ruth hadn't heard before. Not hard at her. Hard at the world. Nobody is taking those girls out of this house. Not while I'm breathing. Ruth stared at him. This man who 3 months ago hadn't wanted children in his life. This man who'd married her for practical reasons and kept his distance and slept on the other side of a wall. Standing in his yard with a letter in his fist, telling her he'd fight for daughters that weren't his blood. You mean that, she said. I mean it like I've never meant anything. Jessie, this could get bad. Silas has money, Henry's share from the mine. He can hire lawyers and make claims and drag this through courts for years. Then we drag back. I've got a ranch. I've got a marriage certificate. I've got a preacher and a neighbor who'll testify you're a fit mother. And I've got a 7-year-old girl who can tell any judge exactly what Silas Calloway did to her family. I won't put Nora through that. You might not have a choice. They stood there in the yard, the wind cutting between them, and Ruth felt the old fear climb her spine. The fear she'd carried from Missouri to Kansas City to Wyoming. The fear that no matter how far she ran, Silas would find them. That his money and his name and the law's preference for men would take her daughters. Ruth, Jessie stepped closer. Look at me. She looked. I didn't just marry you on paper. I married those girls, too. Nora with her fire, and Emmy with her drawings, and all the broken pieces of your family that you brought into my house. They're mine now. Ruth took the letter from his hand, read it herself. The legal language was cold and precise, designed to strip a mother from her children, using words like abandonment and moral fitness and best interests of the minor children. Silas's lawyer painted Ruth as unstable, a woman who'd fled in the night, who'd answered a stranger's advertisement, who'd placed her children in a dangerous frontier environment without proper regard for their welfare. He knows where we are, Ruth said quietly. Looks that way. How? Jessie shook his head. Could be anything. Male roots. Someone talked. These things are hard to hide completely. Ruth folded the letter, pressed it flat against her thigh. I need to tell Nora. Not yet. Let me write to the lawyer in town first. Get proper advice. Then we tell her together. Together, Ruth repeated. The words still felt new in her mouth. Jessie rode to town the next morning and came back with a name. Arthur Blaine, attorney at law, who kept an office above the mercantile and handled everything from land disputes to cattle theft. Jessie said Blaine was smart and fair and owed him a favor from a fence dispute 3 years back. He also came back with news that turned Ruth's blood cold. "There's a man in town asking questions," Jesse said, standing in the kitchen with his hat still on. "Young, dark hair, says he's from Missouri. Asking about a woman named Calloway who might have come through with 2 girls." Ruth sat down because her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. "It's not Silas himself. Too young. Hired man, maybe. Looking to confirm you're here before Silas makes his move." "How long?" "Days. Weeks at most. Once he confirms, Silas will either come himself or send the law." Ruth pressed her hands flat on the table to stop them shaking. "What do we do?" "We get ahead of it. Blaine's filing a counter-petition tomorrow, documenting the marriage, my adoption of the girls, testimony from Hattie about your character and fitness. We build a case so strong that whatever Silas throws at us bounces off." "And if it doesn't?" Jesse sat across from her. "Then I stand between him and those girls, and he goes through me." "Jesse, you can't fight the law with fists." "I'm not talking about fists. I'm talking about standing, being present, being counted. Every man in this territory knows me. They know my ranch, my reputation, my word. When I tell a judge I adopted those girls and I'll raise them right, that carries weight." "More weight than a blood uncle with money and a lawyer?" "It better." Nora found out anyway. She was Nora. She found things out the way water found cracks, naturally and inevitably. Ruth came into the girls' room one evening and found Nora sitting on the bed with the letter in her hands, face white. "Where did you get that?" "Papa's coat pocket." The word hit Ruth like a physical blow. Papa. Nora had never called Jesse anything. Not his name, not sir, not a single address in all these months. And now, reading a letter that threatened to tear them away from him, she'd called him Papa. "Is Uncle Silas coming to take us?" Ruth sat beside her. "He's trying, but we're not going to let him. He'll be mean. He'll say terrible things about you and about Jesse and this ranch. Probably. And they might believe him because he's got money and we don't." "Maybe." Nora folded the letter with precise creases. "Then I'll tell them. I'll tell the judge what Uncle Silas did, how he came to our room, how he yelled, how Emmy stopped talking. I'll tell them everything." "Sweetheart, that would mean standing up in front of strangers and saying hard things. I've done harder things. I walked through a blizzard carrying our bag. I can talk to a judge." Ruth pulled her daughter close and held on so tight she could feel both their hearts beating. This girl, this impossible, fierce, heartbreaking girl who'd carried her father's dying wish on her shoulders for 2 years and never once put it down. "You're the bravest person I know, Nora." "That's what you always say." "Because it's always true." The door at the end of the hall opened. Jesse stood there, and Ruth knew from his face that he'd heard. He looked at Nora, at the letter in her hands, at the word she'd used that was still ringing in the air between them. "Did you just call me Papa?" Nora lifted her chin. "Yes." "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to. I want to." Nora's eyes were fierce and bright. "You gave us a room with a lock. You carved Emmy a horse. You married Mama to keep us safe. And now you're fighting Uncle Silas for us." She paused. "My real daddy would like you. He'd say you're a good man." Jesse braced one hand against the doorframe. Ruth watched him fight for composure. This man who talked to his dead wife through walls because he couldn't say what he felt to the living people around him. "I'm going to do everything I can," he said. "Everything. You understand?" "I understand." "Nobody's taking you from this house, Nora. Not Silas, not any judge, not anyone." "I know." Nora stood up, walked to Jesse, and did something she'd never done before. She put her arms around his waist and pressed her face against his chest. Jesse's hands hovered, uncertain, then came down on her shoulders. He held her like she was made of glass and iron at the same time. Ruth watched through tears she didn't try to stop. A small sound from the corner. Emmy stood in the doorway of the bedroom, wooden horse clutched against her chest, watching her sister hug the cowboy man. Her eyes were huge and dark and full of something Ruth couldn't name. Then Emmy crossed the room, slowly. One step and then another. She stopped at Jesse's side, reached up, and took hold of his hand. Just two of his fingers, gripped in her small fist. She didn't look at him. She looked at Nora. But she held on. Jesse looked down at the small hand gripping his fingers. His face broke. Not crumbled, not collapsed, but broke open the way frozen ground breaks in spring, cracking along lines that were always there, letting something up that had been buried too long. "Well," he said, and his voice was wrecked. "I guess that settles it." Emmy whispered something, so quiet Ruth almost missed it. But Nora heard, and Nora translated with a voice thick with tears. "She says, you're not cold anymore." Jesse closed his eyes, his hand curled gently around Emmy's fingers. "No," he said. "I reckon I'm not." They stood there, the four of them, in a hallway that smelled of wood smoke and bread and the particular warmth that happens when a house becomes a home. Jesse with his girls, Ruth with her family, all of them holding on to each other against whatever was coming. That night, Ruth didn't go to her room. She stood in the hallway after the girls were asleep and looked at Jesse's door, and then at hers, and made a choice she'd been circling for weeks. She knocked on his door. Jesse opened it. He'd taken off his boots, but nothing else. He looked at her and waited. "I don't want to sleep alone tonight," Ruth said. "Not because I'm scared. Because I'm tired of doors between us." Jesse stepped back. Ruth walked in. The room was spare and clean, the bed made with military precision, a photograph of Margaret on the dresser in a simple frame. Ruth looked at it. "She's beautiful," she said. She was. Ruth turned to face him. "I'm not replacing her. I know. But I'm here, and I'm choosing to be here. Not for protection, not for the girls. For you." Jesse reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand trembled. "I'm not good at this, Ruth. At saying things, at feeling things. Margaret used to say I was like a house with all the curtains drawn. Then let me in. One curtain at a time." He kissed her. Not like the wedding kiss, careful and correct. This one was desperate and honest, tasting of grief and gratitude and the terrifying possibility of feeling something again after convincing yourself you never would. Ruth kissed him back, poured into it everything she'd been holding at arm's length. The fear, the hope, the growing, impossible, undeniable truth that she loved this difficult, broken, stubborn man. "Stay," Jesse said against her mouth. "I'm staying." Ruth pulled back enough to see his eyes. "Tonight and every night after." "That's not a promise I'm making lightly." "I know it's not." "Good. Then stop talking." Later, lying in the dark with Jesse's heartbeat under her ear and his arm tight around her waist, Ruth listened to the wind push against the house and thought about Silas, about the letter, about the fight that was coming. "Jesse." "Whatever happens with Silas, whatever the courts decide, I need you to know something." "What?" "I didn't come to Wyoming looking for love. I came looking for survival. But you gave me both." Ruth pressed her hand against his chest. "I love you. Not because you're protecting my daughters, not because you married me, Because you're the kind of man who carves a wooden horse for a child who's afraid of him, and waits for her to come to him instead of pushing. Because you leave firewood by the door and never mention it. Because you're learning to let people in after 14 months of keeping everyone out. Jesse was quiet for so long, Ruth thought he might have fallen asleep. Then his arm tightened. "I love you too," he said, and the words sounded like they'd been dragged out of somewhere deep and locked. "I didn't plan to, didn't want to, fought it every day. But you walked into my house with 2 frozen children and a lie, and you made everything better. You made me better. We made each other better." "Yeah." His lips pressed against her hair. "We did." Ruth closed her eyes. Tomorrow the fight would begin. Lawyers and letters, and a man from Missouri who wanted to take her children. But tonight she was loved. Tonight her daughters were safe. Tonight she was home in a way she'd never been anywhere. And Ruth Hawkins had learned that home wasn't a place you found. It was a thing you built, nail by nail, meal by meal, trust by trust, with someone brave enough to build it with you. Silas Calloway arrived on a Tuesday morning in late April, when the last of the snow was retreating up the mountainsides, and the creek behind the house ran high with melt. Ruth was teaching Nora arithmetic at the kitchen table when she heard the horses, 2 of them, moving fast up the road. She went to the window, and her blood stopped. She knew him from 200 yards away. The way he sat a horse, the set of his shoulders, that particular tilt of his hat that Henry used to wear the same way, because they were brothers, and brothers carried the same bones. "Nora, take your sister to the back room. Lock the door." Nora looked at her mother's face and didn't ask questions. She grabbed Emmy's hand and ran. Ruth wiped her hands on her apron, took it off, folded it on the table. Then she walked to the porch and stood there with her back straight and her hands still, and waited for the man who'd driven her across 1,000 miles of winter to ride into her yard. Silas Calloway pulled his horse up 10 feet from the porch. He was thinner than Ruth remembered, harder in the face. The man beside him was older, wearing a suit under his travel coat, carrying a leather case. The lawyer. "Ruth," Silas smiled. That smile she knew, the one he'd worn the first week when he'd brought candy and called Nora pretty girl. "You look well. Country life agrees with you." "Get off my property, Silas." "Your property." He swung down from the horse. "Last I checked, this belongs to a man named Hawkins. You're just the hired help who got herself a ring." The suited man dismounted more carefully. "Mrs. Hawkins, my name is Gerald Pruitt. I represent Mr. Calloway in the matter of custody regarding Nora and Emmeline Calloway. We have a court order requiring you to present the children for evaluation." "I've seen your letter. My lawyer has responded." "Your lawyer," Silas laughed. "Some frontier hack above a general store. That's what you've got protecting my brother's children." The barn door opened. Jesse came out with Tom behind him. He walked across the yard without hurrying, but Ruth saw what Silas couldn't. The way Jesse's right hand stayed loose at his side. The way Tom moved wide, positioning himself between the visitors and the house. They'd talked about this, planned for it. Jesse had known this day was coming. "Mr. Calloway." Jesse stopped beside Ruth on the porch. Close enough their shoulders touched. "You're on my land. And you're harboring my nieces." Silas's smile didn't waver. "I'm their uncle, their blood, their father's own brother, and their mother stole them in the middle of the night and dragged them to this God-forsaken place without a word. Their mother brought them somewhere safe. From what I hear, safe wasn't something your house offered." Silas's smile flickered. "I don't know what stories Ruth's been telling you, but she's always been dramatic. My brother spoiled her, gave her ideas above her station. After he passed, she couldn't accept that the house was mine. She left out of spite. She left because you scared her 4-year-old daughter into silence. Silas's jaw tightened. Children are fragile. Emmeline was always a quiet child. She wasn't quiet before you. Ruth's voice cut between them. She sang, Silas. She used to sing every morning while I brushed her hair. She hasn't sung in 8 months because of you. That's your version. A court will hear mine. Then let's let a court hear it. Jesse stepped forward, off the porch, onto the ground where Silas stood. He was taller than Silas by 3 inches, broader by a foot. But it wasn't size that made Silas step back. It was the absolute certainty in Jesse's voice. I've adopted those girls legally. They carry my name. This ranch is their home. Their mother is my wife. You want to take them? You go through every legal channel there is and you do it proper. But you don't come to my home and threaten my family. Pruitt stepped forward, professional calm intact. Mr. Hawkins, no one is threatening anyone. We're simply asserting Mr. Calloway's rights as next of kin. His rights ended when he terrorized 3 people out of their home. Jesse turned to the lawyer. You want to serve papers? Serve them to Arthur Blaine on Main Street. He's expecting you. But this conversation is done. You are not seeing those children today. I have a court order. You have a petition filed in Missouri. We're in Wyoming territory. Your Missouri paper doesn't compel anything here until a territorial judge says it does. Jesse paused. I checked. Pruitt's expression shifted, the first crack in his composure. He glanced at Silas. This isn't over, Silas said. He was looking at Ruth. That look she knew. The one he'd given her through the bedroom door at night. Possession disguised as concern. Those are Henry's girls. They belong with family. They are with family. Ruth stepped beside Jesse. You were never their family, Silas. You were their nightmare. And if you come near them again, I'll tell every judge between here and Washington exactly what you did in that house. Every word you said standing over my bed. Every night you came to our door. And I'll bring the neighbors from Missouri who heard the screaming and did nothing. Don't think I won't. Silas's mask slipped, just for a second. Enough for Ruth to see the rage underneath. The same rage that had filled her bedroom doorway in the dark. But they were in daylight now, on open ground, and Jesse Hawkins stood beside her, and Tom stood behind her, and inside the house 2 girls were safe behind a locked door. Get on your horse, Jesse said. Ride to town. Do this the legal way, or don't do it at all. But you are not welcome on my land. And if you come back without a judge and a marshal, I'll treat you like any other trespasser. Pruitt took Silas's arm. We should go. We'll file with the territorial court. Silas shook him off. He stared at Ruth with something that went beyond anger, into the cold territory of a man who believed he owned the world and couldn't fathom being told otherwise. Henry would be ashamed of you, he said. Henry would have killed you for what you did to his children, and you know it. Silas mounted his horse. Pruitt followed. They rode out without looking back, and Ruth watched them until they were nothing but dust on the road. Then her knees gave out, and Jesse caught her. Easy, I've got you. He's going to fight. He's not going to stop. Then we don't stop either. Jesse held her on the porch, his arms solid around her, his chin resting on her head. Ruth, he walked onto our land, and he left it without those girls. That's a win, the first of many. You don't know that. I know I'm not going to quit. Is that enough? Ruth pressed her face into his chest. It's enough. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Ruth's life, and she'd survived a blizzard. Arthur Blaine filed counter-petitions, gathered testimony, documented everything. Hattie gave a statement so fierce the clerk asked her to lower her voice. Tom testified about the condition Ruth and the girls arrived in. Reverend Crane provided a character reference. Even Mrs. Patterson from town, who'd been cold to Ruth for months, signed a letter attesting to the family's respectability. Jesse sold 10 head of cattle to pay legal fees. Ruth protested. He said it wasn't a discussion. The territorial judge scheduled a hearing for June. Ruth couldn't eat for 3 days after the notice arrived. Jesse found her at the kitchen table at midnight, staring at nothing. "Talk to me," he said. "What if it's not enough? What if Silas's money buys a decision? What if they take my girls and send them back to that house? Then I ride to Missouri and I bring them home." "Jesse, I'm not being dramatic. I'm being factual. Those girls are not going back to a man who hurt them. If the law fails us, I don't fail them. You'd break the law for children that aren't yours by blood? They're mine by everything that matters." Jesse sat beside her. "Ruth, blood didn't protect them. Blood is what hurt them. What I'm offering is better than blood. It's choice. I chose them. Every day, I choose them." Ruth took his hand. She'd stopped being surprised by his capacity for fierceness, this man who barely spoke for the first month she knew him. Grief had made him quiet. Love was making him loud. The hearing took place in the territorial courthouse in Cheyenne, a 2-day ride from the ranch. They left the girls with Hattie, which was its own ordeal. Nora refused to let go of Ruth's hand at the door. "I should be there. I should tell them what he did." "Sweetheart, you wrote it down. Every word. The judge will read it." "Words on paper aren't the same as looking someone in the eye and saying it." Ruth knelt. "I know. And I'm so proud of you for being willing. But I need to protect you from that room, from sitting in front of Silas and saying those things while he watches. That's my job. Let me do it." Nora's lip trembled. The first time Ruth had seen her daughter's composure crack in months. "What if you lose?" "Then I come home and we figure out what's next. Together, like always." "Promise you'll come home." "I promise on everything I am." Emmy stood behind Nora, clutching her wooden horses, both of them, the big one and the small one. She tugged Ruth's sleeve and whispered something. Ruth leaned close, listened, closed her eyes. "I'll tell him, baby. I promise." She stood and walked to where Jesse was loading the wagon. "Emmy wants you to know something." "What?" "She says don't let the mean man win. She says you're her papa, and papas don't let mean men win." Jesse gripped the side of the wagon. His knuckles went white. He breathed once, twice, 3 times. Then he turned to Emmy, crouched down at the bottom of the porch steps, and held out his hand. Emmy walked down the steps, one at a time, slowly. She put her hand in his and looked at him with Henry's brown eyes. "I won't let him win," Jesse said. "That's my promise to you, Emmy Hawkins." Emmy squeezed his fingers. Then she let go and ran back to Hattie, burying her face in the old woman's skirt. Jesse stood. Ruth saw his face. She'd never seen him look like that before. Like a man who'd found the thing he was willing to die for, and was at peace with it. "Let's go," he said. The courthouse was crowded and hot. Silas sat on one side with Pruitt and 2 witnesses Ruth didn't recognize. Ruth and Jesse sat on the other with Blaine, who was calm and organized and better than Ruth had dared hope. Judge Walter Crane, no relation to the preacher, was a gray-bearded man who listened more than he spoke. He read every document, every testimony. Nora's written statement, which was 4 pages long and detailed in a way that made the clerk's hands shake while reading it aloud. Silas's case was simple. Blood relative, financial means, established home. The mother had fled without legal authority, taken the children across state lines, entered into a hasty marriage with a stranger, and placed the children in a remote and dangerous environment. Blaine's counter was simpler. He called Ruth to testify. She told the truth, all of it. The nights, the screaming, the door without a lock, the morning Emmy stopped talking. She told it in the same steady voice she used to teach Nora arithmetic, and she didn't cry, and she didn't look at Silas. Then Blaine called Jesse. Jesse Hawkins walked to the front of that courtroom in his best shirt with his hat in his hands, and he told a judge he'd never met about a woman who'd arrived in a blizzard with 2 frozen children and a lie. He told about Emmy's blue lips and how he'd carried her to the fire, about Nora standing in his barn telling him she was watching, about wooden horses and charcoal drawings, and a 4-year-old who'd whispered, "warm," like it was the most precious word in the language. "Those girls came to my house as strangers," Jesse said. "They're leaving as my daughters. Not because of a piece of paper. Because I watched them heal. I watched them learn to trust again after a man who was supposed to protect them broke that trust into pieces. I watched a 7-year-old carry her family on her shoulders because the adults in her life failed her." He looked at the judge, not at Silas, not at the lawyers, at the man who held his family's future. "I ain't a perfect man, Your Honor. I talked to my dead wife at night. I worked too hard. I didn't even want children when they showed up at my door. But wanting and choosing are different things. I chose these girls. I choose them every morning when I wake up, and every night when I check their room to make sure they're sleeping safe. That's not blood. It's better than blood. It's a decision made every single day." The courtroom was silent. Pruitt started to speak. The judge held up his hand. "Mr. Calloway," the judge said, turning to Silas, "I've read the depositions. I've read the child's statement. I've heard the testimony. I'm going to ask you one question, and I want an honest answer." Silas straightened. "Of course, Your Honor." "Did you enter the bedroom of your deceased brother's wife on multiple occasions after dark with the intention of intimidating her into vacating the family home?" Pruitt leaned toward Silas, whispering urgently. Silas brushed him off. "I had a right to my property. She was living there without paying rent. That wasn't my question." Silas's jaw worked. "I may have spoken harshly. The situation was emotional for everyone. Did the child, Emmeline, stop speaking after these incidents began?" "I don't know when the child stopped speaking. I wasn't paying attention to her." The judge nodded slowly. "No, I don't imagine you were." He retired to his chambers. Ruth sat with her hands clasped so tight her fingers went numb. Jesse sat beside her, still as stone. 40 minutes passed. An hour. The judge returned. "Petition for custody is denied. The children will remain in the legal custody of Ruth and Jesse Hawkins. Mr. Calloway, I'm further ordering that you have no contact with the minor children without the express written consent of both parents. Any violation will result in contempt charges." Ruth's breath left her body. Jesse's hand found hers under the table and held on. Silas stood. "This isn't finished." "It is in my courtroom, Mr. Calloway. I suggest you return to Missouri and grieve your brother properly instead of tormenting his children." Silas walked out without looking back. Pruitt followed, already packing his case. The door closed behind them, and Ruth realized she was crying. Jesse pulled her against him right there in the courthouse, in front of the judge and the clerk and everyone. He held her, and she held him, and neither of them said a word, because there weren't words big enough for what they felt. "Let's go home," Jesse said finally. "Yes, let's go home." They rode 2 days back to the ranch. Ruth didn't sleep either night. Not from worry this time. From the strange, weightless feeling of safety. Real safety. Legal, documented, unassailable safety. Her daughters were hers. The law said so. A judge said so. And the man beside her had stood in a courtroom and claimed them as his own without a second's hesitation. They came over the last ridge at sunset and saw the ranch below. Smoke from the chimney. Hattie's horse tied to the porch rail. And on the porch, two small figures standing side by side, watching the road. Ruth waved. Nora grabbed Emmy's hand and they ran. Down the porch steps, across the yard, through the gate. Nora reached the wagon first, already climbing up before Jessie pulled the horses to a stop. "Did we win? Mama, did we win?" "We won, baby. We won." Nora threw her arms around Ruth, squeezing so hard Ruth couldn't breathe and didn't care. Behind them, Jessie climbed down from the wagon, and Emmy stood in the yard, looking up at him. "Hey, little one," Jessie said softly. Emmy reached up with both arms, the universal gesture of a child who wants to be held. Jessie picked her up, settled her against his chest, and Emmy put her head on his shoulder and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Papa," she said. Not a whisper, a word, clear and sure and loud enough for all of them to hear. Jessie closed his eyes. Ruth watched tears run down the face of a man who hadn't cried since he buried his wife and child in the South Field 14 months ago. He held Emmy against his heart and let the tears come. And Nora pressed against his side, and Ruth put her arms around all of them. And they stood there in the yard while the sun went down, and Hattie watched from the porch with a handkerchief pressed to her mouth. That evening, after Hattie left and Tom had been told the news and celebrated by doing a terrible jig in the yard, after the girls were fed and bathed and tucked into bed, Ruth found Jessie on the porch looking at the stars. She sat beside him, took his hand. "Emmy spoke," she said. She did. Not a whisper, a real word, out loud. I heard it. His voice was rough and wrecked and full. I'll hear it for the rest of my life. Ruth leaned against his shoulder. "Jessie Hawkins, 3 months ago you didn't want children." 3 months ago, I didn't want to be alive most days. And now? He turned to her. This man she'd lied to and cooked for and fought beside and fallen in love with in the middle of a Wyoming winter. He cupped her face in his calloused hands and looked at her with eyes that had finally stopped grieving and started living. "Now I've got more than I deserve, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to earn it." "You don't have to earn it, Jessie. You just have to keep choosing it." "Every day," he said. "Every single day." He kissed her. She kissed him back. And in the room at the end of the hall, Nora lay awake, listening to the silence of a house where no one screamed, and no one pounded on doors, and no one told them to leave. She pulled Emmy closer and whispered to her sleeping sister, "We're home, Emmy. We're really home." On the windowsill, the 2 wooden horses stood side by side. On the floor, Emmy's latest drawing lay face up in the moonlight. The house with the chimney. The 4 figures, all together now, no space between them. And above them, filling the whole sky in thick charcoal strokes, one word in wobbly 4-year-old letters that Nora had helped her spell. Family. Ruth Calloway had arrived in Wyoming with 2 freezing daughters and a lie. Ruth Hawkins stood on her own porch with a husband who loved her, children who were safe, and a home no one could take away. She'd built it from nothing, from desperation and courage and the stubborn refusal to let the world break her daughters the way it had tried to break her. This was not a fairy tale. There were no glass slippers, no fairy godmothers, no magic that fixed what was broken. There was only a woman who kept walking through a blizzard when stopping meant dying. A man who opened his door when closing it would have been easier. Two little girls who taught the adults around them what bravery actually looked like. And a Wyoming winter that locked four strangers together long enough to become a family. The ranch stretched quiet under the stars. The fire burned low in the hearth. The lock on the bedroom door sat untouched because nobody needed it anymore. Ruth Hawkins closed her eyes and breathed and knew with every fiber of her being that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not where she'd ended up, where she'd chosen, where she'd fought to stay, where she'd built something permanent from wreckage and winter and two words a 4-year-old child had given her like gifts. Warm. Papa. That was enough. That was everything. That was home.